All right, so it is what is today? Well, it's August. It's the 9th. I don't know. Anyway, it is the first class after the second herb walk, which unfortunately the herb walk did not record the way that I had meant for it to. So I unfortunately do not have footage of this time's herb walk. I will try and post a link to a video that is some of the stuff we saw last year, but it's not the full time. But so I was disappointed to find that had not worked the way I'd hoped for it to. But anyway, we had a good visit to the woods and got to see some of the things growing there. And so today we're going to be talking about the liver. And the liver is a pretty large organ. It's the largest solid organ in the abdomen. And it's sort of, people describe it as being on the right side, but really it goes most of the way across. But the thicker end of it is on the right side of the body, just under the rib cage. And the whole organ is sort of vaguely wedge shaped and has three different sections. The liver is not as easy to classify as some other organs in terms of what system it's part of, because it's sort of part of a lot of systems. And in some ways, that could be said of many organs. But with the liver, it's a little more like that. For instance, we can think of the liver as being part of the digestive system because it produces and releases bile, which is a digestive substance that helps to make fats absorbable by the body. But also, the liver is a crucial part of the endocrine system. And the liver is also a very important part of the circulatory system. So it's very much central to and deeply involved in multiple systems of the body. And to some extent, that's true of any organ. You know, like we would consider the lungs to be part of the respiratory system, but they tie in really heavily to the circulatory system, and they also have nervous system functions and some endocrine system functions as well. So, you know, there are a lot of things that come into play with any organ, but the liver is not really like obviously part of one system over another because of the roles that it plays in multiple different systems. So we're going to talk some about its circulatory system function, its digestive system functions, and its endocrine system functions, and some strategies for helping the liver in a few different common scenarios that you're likely to see if you're working with people. So just in general, the liver has a lot of circulation that goes through it. People often think of the liver as being like filtering or purifying the blood, and that's not exactly wrong at all, but it's a very incomplete description of what's going on. The liver is metabolizing and changing substances in the blood. So it's as substances pass through the liver, they get changed into other substances that have other effects in the body. So there are many medicines, many nutrients and things like that become something more usable to the body after the liver has altered them, alchemized them. There are also poisonous substances that are turned into less poisonous substances by way of the liver too. So it will sometimes break down substances that are maybe a toxic substance into component parts that are not remarkable, that are not particularly biologically active. So it's not just, so I think sometimes people visualize it as being like a filter or a strainer that's catching stuff and removing it from the bloodstream. And that's not exactly what's going on. It's more that there are chemical changes or changes in the nature of substances as they pass through the liver. And so a lot of blood flows through the liver at any given time. And like I said, it's a very large organ as well. The liver also creates and stores substances for the body. One of those substances is glycogen. Glycogen is a starch. And one of the ways that your body can regulate blood sugar is by changing it into glycogen. It can turn calories into the starch called glycogen, which can then quickly be converted into blood sugar. So it's one of the ways that your body stores energy. And a lot of that happens in the liver. It happens in other tissues as well, but a lot of it happens in the liver. And this is something that I think maybe a lot of people aren't really aware of just in day-to-day life, is that everybody realizes that calories can be stored as fat. And so fat is more of a long-term storage of energy in the body that takes time to build up and time to release. Glycogen can be released very quickly. If your body is not taking in enough nutrients, it's going to start using this glycogen, which is your short-term storage of caloric energy. Glycogen, when it's stored, is bound up with water. So if someone fasts for several days and uses up their glycogen, their body will get rid of the water that the glycogen was stored with. And so that actually sometimes makes people lose a bunch of weight quickly at the beginning of a crash diet or at the beginning of fasting. And so sometimes people will be like, oh, I've been doing this diet for a week and I've lost 15 pounds. And if you've lost 15 pounds in a week, it's not because of burning fat. It's really not very feasible to burn 15 pounds of fat in a week, because a pound of fat contains about 3,500 calories, and a day's usage of calories is usually around 2,000 calories. Now, you could theoretically spend 4,000 calories in a day if you were being very physically active. That wouldn't be that extraordinary. But even if you were just burning that many calories and taking in no nutrition, you wouldn't burn 15 pounds of fat in a week. So a lot of the time when people have these rapid weight changes, when they go on a diet or when they're fasting or something like that, what actually is happening is that they're using up their glycogen stores for calories, and the water that was stored with that glycogen is being released and then filtered out of their system by their kidneys. So that's something that happens. Also, if someone is perpetually or chronically depleted of energy, then their glycogen will get used up, and that's a situation that you would often see in someone who is having extreme daytime sleepiness, is they don't have any short-term storage of energy left. So when they run out of energy, they run out of energy really hard and maybe fall asleep while driving or fall asleep in the middle of working or something like that. So all of that has to do with the liver, because the liver is what is meant to be storing up glycogen. And usually when it's not, it's actually not a matter of the liver not functioning. It's usually a matter of the energy getting used up. But I think it's important to know about that function of the liver as well. So, when you look at the history of the liver, people have always been aware that the liver existed, but they seem to have had a pretty vague idea what it did at a lot of different points in history. People knew about bile production because you can see the bile in a liver if you most of the ancient people's knowledge of organs and systems and things like that didn't actually come from humans. It came from butchering their own animals for meat. But so some things they got wrong because it was different in animals and in humans. But the liver is pretty similar, and the liver produces bile, and people were able to see bile. So they knew about bile. Bile comes out of the liver, goes into the bile duct, or is stored in the gallbladder, and from there is released into the digestive system. And when bile gets into your digestive system, it helps to make fats able to turn into a substance that can be mixed with water so that your body can digest and absorb fats, which are a very important source of energy, as well as a very important source of building blocks for a lot of the substances in your body. So caring for your liver will help you to have more energy. Yes, generally speaking, caring for your liver will help you to have more energy. Having a liver that is uncared for or abused, or even has been far into the past, will often result in people having depleted energy and stamina. And there's more reasons to that than just the glycogen, which we'll get into in a little bit here. So yeah, people always knew about bile. And so bile was one of the four humors when people were in ancient Greek times, when people were looking at medicine of the sort that Hippocrates and Galen wrote about. Bile was one of the substances that they talked a lot about. So, we've known about bile for a long time. Of course, if somebody gets very sick, they can have bile coming out of either end of their digestive tract. So, it's a pretty obvious and visible substance, as is blood or phlegm, which were also things that people knew a lot about, or were at least talked a lot about. So that aspect of the liver's function has always been pretty apparent. But bile has also kind of been associated with different emotions, anger, things like that don't necessarily directly have anything to do with bile. So, that's a digestive substance. There are other things, bilirubin, which is another thing that the liver plays a role in. There are other enzymes, a lot of enzymes that are produced by the liver, some of which are secreted into the digestive system and help to break down foods and help to make nutrients available for the body to absorb and use. And then there are also a lot of enzymes in the liver that are part of how it works when the circulation flows through it. So an enzyme, just to review, is a biological substance that helps chemical transformations of other substances to take place. To put it simply, it's a substance that helps other substances to change form. So for instance, a lot of the time in the body, chemical reactions happen, which if you were trying to reproduce in a lab, you would probably have to have them happen at a much higher temperature than what they do in the human body. And the enzymes are what is helping to facilitate that and making that difference. So the liver is a great place as far as enzyme production in the body. It's a big part of where that takes place, and a big part of where substances in the body, including medicines, including herbs, including a lot of prescription drugs, although not all of them, are changed in the liver. And of course, alcohol is well known to have an effect on the liver. And that's something that people had worked out far into the distant past, is that if a person or an animal drank too much alcohol or ate too much fat, it had an effect on the liver and changed the consistency of the liver and could lead to a shorter life. So people, at least English-speaking people, named this organ the liver, which kind of suggests that that is the seat of life in the body, where the living is taking place. And I think that's pretty interesting. It's a sort of a weird word, really, because the whole person is doing the living, but they named this one particular part of it the liver, as though that was the part that lived and everything else just kind of supported it or worked around it. So that's one way of looking at the liver. But yeah, so it's playing a really vital role in the digestion of nutrients, both by pouring substances into the digestive system, which then change how we break down and use things that we've eaten, and also by acting as a filtration and transformation station in the body, where blood flowing through has substances that are in it get changed into other substances. Let's see. A question here that says, if you take the raw garlic, it's good to chop it and cut it and let it sit for a few minutes so an enzyme can be released. Yeah, so the enzymes in raw garlic are getting released from the cells, and they're sort of changing some of the substances in the garlic. So it's changing and becoming a little, as it's in the air, becoming a little less intense, a little less hot, and changing the flavor of it a little bit and changing the properties a little bit of it a little bit, so that it contains more of a substance called allicin, which helps to dilate blood vessels and helps with blood pressure. So it's not that the enzyme is actually entering your body and making the change. The substance called allicin in the garlic is what's doing that, but the enzyme is helping to change, the enzyme in the garlic from its own cells is helping to change what the substances are in the garlic to make it medicinal in a slightly different way when you take it. So all living things contain, well, I'm not sure that's entirely true. Most living things contain enzymes, and enzymes are responsible for a lot of biological processes, or they help a lot of biological processes to happen. And there are lots and lots of different kinds of enzymes, nearly countless different kinds of enzymes, some of which have names and some of which don't. And a lot of the time, if you look at the names of enzymes, if you're reading something and you see a name of a substance that ends in ASE, that's usually an enzyme. And the first part that comes before the ASE often refers to what the enzyme acts on. Sometimes it refers to where the enzyme comes from. So that can be a little bit ambiguous, but the ASE ending generally indicates an enzyme. So sometimes you'll see words like protease, which means an enzyme that helps to transform or break down protein, or lipase is an enzyme that helps to break down or transform lipids, fats and oils. And then there's amylase, which is one of the main enzymes in your saliva, which helps to break down and transform amyls, which are starches. So there are a whole lot of different enzymes that end in ASE that whose first part of their name might refer to what they help to break down. Structurally, enzymes tend to be strings of amino acids. So we could call them proteins or peptides in terms of their chemical structure. but we call them enzymes in terms of the function that they carry out as far as helping transformations to happen. Outside of a biological context, sometimes the word catalyst is used for a substance that helps chemical transformations happen. But in living systems, and especially with these peptide-based catalysts, we call them enzymes. And so the liver produces a lot of enzymes. There are certain enzymes that people refer to as liver enzymes, which these are enzymes that people look at in medical tests to see if somebody has inflammation in their liver. So if somebody gets a liver enzyme panel, what that's looking at is a couple of enzymes that the liver produces when it's inflamed that are used to measure inflammation in the liver. But there are lots and lots of other enzymes that come from the liver that aren't being measured by that test, that don't have anything to do with that. So if you hear people talking about liver enzymes, sometimes depending on the context, they might just be talking about these couple of enzymes that are used to measure inflammation in the liver. Or they might be talking about the thousands and thousands of substances that the liver uses to transform and metabolize. So yeah, the liver has its kind of its own separate, the circulatory system of the liver is sort of almost like a side routine or a side chain in the human circulatory system. So stuff goes through the liver and gets metabolized, and then it goes back into the larger circulation. And that can happen. Well, some substances get transformed when they go through the liver. And then when those substances go through the liver a second time, they get transformed again. So, for example, alcohol, when it passes through the liver once, it changes into a couple different substances. And then when it passes through the liver a second time, it changes into some other substances. They get broken down and excreted. And if somebody doesn't have the right enzymes to metabolize alcohol, they can get skin flushing, or they can get extreme sickness. And some people are much better at metabolizing it than others, which kind of determines how long. It doesn't necessarily determine how drunk somebody gets off of a particular amount of alcohol, but it determines or affects how long it stays in their system. So as someone's liver, if someone has a drinking habit and their liver is becoming less sufficient, which often happens, after time, both because of age and because of the drinking, then often they will get into a situation where they can no longer handle amounts of alcohol that they used to be able to handle. Or if they have, 2 drinks in 2 hours, and it will affect them much more strongly than it used to, or something like that. So that's a very common thing to see in people that have long-term drinking problems. You also see it with other substances, with other substance abuse scenarios. And sometimes you see it with medication that people rely on as well, that their body just becomes less able to metabolize it or less able to tolerate it as they age and as their liver ages. The nice thing about the human liver is that it is built with a lot of redundancy and a lot of regenerative capacity. So for the most part, it only takes about a third of a healthy liver to keep a person alive. And if a person gets a lot of their liver badly damaged, it can regrow pretty quickly. It can regenerate more liver tissue pretty quickly. So that's all. That can be, it's good that people have that, because it makes it less likely that they will die of chronic toxicity from anything. And also injuries to the liver are, less often fatal than injuries to the heart or brain, for instance, just partly because it doesn't have any moving parts really. I mean, it kind of does, but it doesn't have to beat like the heart does. And it does have a lot of redundant capacity for doing exactly the same stuff. So there are multiple different types of cells within the liver, and there's some different types of tissue too, because there are vessels and things in it. But there are multiple different types of cells in the liver that are all working together to carry out essentially a particular set of tasks. The liver also stores some substances. B12 is an example. Vitamin B12 is actually stored in the liver and can be stored in the liver for decades. Or at least many years to a couple of decades. So it is a repository for certain substances in the body. It also synthesizes a lot of substances like vitamin D, like porphyrins, which are a whole category of substance that have regulatory effects in the body and that are the building blocks of some other substances. And then it also has a function in the endocrine system because the liver can turn fats into cholesterol, which are then sent out to the various different glands in the body that can turn them into other things. So many of the steroid hormones that are produced in the body start out with the liver taking fatty acids and combining them to make a steroid nucleus. And the steroid nucleus is connected to a side chain, and that's a cholesterol molecule. And so we get cholesterol from food, from other animals that have livers, where their liver has created the cholesterol, and then it's in the food. And then we also synthesize it in our own livers from fats. And this cholesterol goes to different organs in the body, like the ovaries or testes, where it's produced into things like testosterone and estrogen. It goes to the adrenal cortex, which is the outside of the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, where it's made into cortisone and cortisol. It's also made into progestogens, progesterone, pregnenolone, various other less well-known steroidal hormones. So all of those are reliant on the liver, essentially. If somebody doesn't have a very functional liver, they're going to have a very hard time having a very functional endocrine system. And they're also going to have a decreased ability for their body to regulate inflammation because the adrenal cortex is the main regulator of inflammation. It can produce powerful anti-inflammatory steroids that are present in the body in very small amounts, but have a big effect on inflammation. They have some other effects too, which we'll get into more in future discussions, but inflammation is a big part of nearly all disease processes, and the liver is a big part of controlling and regulating inflammation in the body. As we talked about in the past, stagnation is also a big part of many disease processes, and the liver, because of the role it plays in circulation and digestion, can be very affected by and can also have an effect on stagnation in the body. The liver produces cholesterol. Do statins affect or inhibit the liver? Yes, statins do work by affecting and inhibiting the liver. So they are definitely interacting with how the liver works. And the liver also is where they're metabolized and removed from the body. So yeah, statins, in my opinion, they're kind of vastly oversold. But there have been, I mean, my opinion's not all that persuasive on the matter, but there have been a lot of studies that show that statins by themselves don't necessarily mean people have fewer heart attacks, and that they do have some serious side effects for some people, which are often kind of downplayed, or people are sometimes treated like they're just being hysterical or whatever when they report them, but they can be serious. So yeah, statins do have an effect on the liver. I mean, they work by having an effect on the liver, and sometimes that can be a negative thing for people. Yeah, so yeah, cholesterol, people kind of associate cholesterol with heart attacks and things like that, but it is really a vital thing that your body needs and that your body runs off of, and the key systems in your body rely upon. So, it's not just like this is a bad substance. And it's not even like, sometimes people will talk about high density lipoprotein and good cholesterol versus bad cholesterol, but you need both kinds. I mean, both kinds are not really good or bad. They're both things that your body needs. And like everything else, and especially like all hormones, it is something that you need in a particular balance and in a particular, way, but it does need to be there. So categorizing it as bad is, in my opinion, somewhat childish, or at least a vast oversimplification of the situation. Let's see. Let's see. So yeah, the liver in general should be processing a lot of the blood that is in the body, metabolizing substances that are in the blood into other substances. It should be producing bile that goes into the digestive system and helps to solubilize and make available certain nutrients. That bile can also have a purging effect. If there's enough of it, it can cause somebody to have diarrhea or nausea, and sometimes the body uses that function to get rid of stuff that has entered the digestive tract that it's trying to get rid of. So the liver can actually have a protective effect on the body, keeping it from getting poisoned in the first place, maybe by having that type of an effect. And then after things have been metabolized, the liver also plays a really important role in the endocrine system. In a roundabout way, the liver also plays a role in the nervous system because it is helping to metabolize substances that would have an effect on the nervous system. So a lot of the time, if somebody's liver is seriously affected, it will affect their mood, because there will be substances not being broken down by the liver that have a mood altering effect, that are just present as a result of metabolism, not necessarily like, somebody's medicine that they took, or, that would be mood altering, although that is also processed by the liver. But just substances that the body is producing as waste products that might actually have an effect on the nervous system if they're not processed out by the liver. Or maybe even if they're processed out too quickly by the liver. So it does have an effect on stabilizing the mood when the liver is working properly. And it also has an effect on the energy. So as you can see, it's a very multifaceted organ. That's not even all that it does by any means. It has lots and lots of different functions, but that's just kind of a few broad categories of the things that the liver does in the human body. And so it's a very important organ that needs to be nourished and taken care of and not abused. In the culture we live in, for most people, alcohol is a really big thing. So, lifetime exposure to alcohol is one of the biggest determinants of liver health in the people that you're likely to see in the course of being an herbalist. Whether you're doing that for friends and family or whether you're doing that professionally at some point, you're likely to see people who have a history of liver damage, a history of liver abuse. There's also nutrient deficiencies that affect how the liver functions, although you're not as likely to see those. But severe B vitamin deficiencies can be kind of similar to long-term alcohol use in terms of how it affects the liver. If it's like somebody that's living on a very limited diet, like just corn because that's all they have, that can have a very serious effect on the liver too, and on the whole body by way of the liver. But that's not something that you're as likely to see in 21st century clinical practice or community practice, but it's something that can happen. So yeah, lots of different roles for the liver. Generally speaking, there are a couple of broad categories of herbs out there for the liver. There are herbs that protect the liver, which are called hepatoprotective. Hepato is the liver, it's the Greek word for the liver. And so that's a prefix that's involved in a lot of words related to the liver, like hepatitis, which is inflammation of the liver. Hepatoprotective herbs are herbs that have a protective effect on the liver. They do this by either having a soothing effect or by helping the liver to not be destroyed by substances that are passing through it. One example of an herb that is often used for its hepatoprotective properties, which we don't really have a very super clear idea of what the pharmacology of this herb is, but there have been some studies showing that it does potentially have some beneficial effects, is milk thistle. And milk thistle is a seed from a particular type of thistle. It's not the thistles that you'd usually see growing in fields around here, although those might have some similar effects too. But milk thistle is not super closely related to them, but it is a prickly plant in the sunflower family, as they are. So it has, when it's cooked in water, it releases some mucilaginous substances. Sometimes I use it in my pathology lab as a culture plate for growing certain organisms on, but it will make sort of a gelatinous substance if you cook it for a while. But the extract of it contains this mucilaginous substance as well as a lot of other substances, and seems to be able to keep the liver from being as badly damaged by hepatotoxic substances that are toxic to the cells of the liver. There was one particular study done a number of years ago, quite a while ago now, where they were giving milk thistle to people who came to emergency rooms in Europe for poisoning with a particular type of Amanita mushroom. And it worked better than nothing. It didn't work all the time, but it worked better than nothing, and appeared to save some people's lives and appeared to have some ability to protect the liver from this very intense poisoning. In a more mild version of things, I often will use it to help the liver to recover after somebody has stopped using, or while they're trying to stop using, a addictive substances that are processed by the liver, including alcohol and opiates. Rosemary is another substance that's known to be hepatoprotective. It just kind of helps in some way to keep the cells of the liver from being as easily damaged by substances that might damage them. So that's one category of herbs that help the liver. Another category of herbs are bitters. And bitters are exactly what they sound like. They're herbs that taste bitter. And generally speaking, when your body tastes something bitter, the liver starts producing more juices. So that happens because a lot of toxic plants are bitter, and your body is just kind of designed in such a way that that bitter taste sets off some alarms in your liver, and it starts producing some substances to try and quell the poisonous plant you may have just eaten. Of course, if you are actually eating very poisonous plants, that's not going to be to the benefit of your liver. But if you're eating bitter things that are not actually very poisonous, then that's something that a way that you can get your liver to put detoxifying substances into the digestive system without actually poisoning yourself. So because bile is something that helps to digest foods, helps with digestion, sometimes bitters are a thing that people would use after a large meal to promote digestion and to relieve feeling of being too full, and relieve reflux and things like that. So the liver does help to the juices from the liver tend to help get things moving in the right direction. Now, if somebody is severely constipated and they take bitters, if they're mildly constipated and they take bitters, then it will often produce a bowel movement. If they're very severely constipated, sometimes it will make them nauseous because basically the body is trying to push things down, but they can't go down, so they come back up. It's not appropriate in all situations, but some bitter herbs can really help to move things in the right direction. And that's been a use that bitters have been put to for a long time and in a lot of situations. So there are a lot of digestive bitters. Swedish bitters is a famous compound. There's also Angostura bitters, and these are all things that have been used as remedies to try and help promote digestion, in addition to having other uses as well. And so those things are working on the liver. Some herbs like golden seal are pretty strongly bitter and get the liver to release enough bitter substances into the digestive tract that they will have laxative effect. And so sometimes those herbs have been used for detoxifying or purging or just trying to get everything out of your digestive system. So that's a more severe, more intense way of trying to get your body to cleanse itself by making your liver work harder, which may also make it metabolize things faster, because as the liver is pouring out more bile, that means more circulation has to go through the liver to replace those juices. And in so doing, there's a chance that it's going to be making more substances pass through there and get transformed and metabolized. And there are a lot of herbs. If you read old books about herbs, there are a lot of herbs that are just used because they're bitter, and that's like the main thing that they have to contribute. And some of those things have other properties as well. Like This is some tincture of wild lettuce. It's got a reddish color to it. This is intensely bitter. Intensely bitter. It's also pain relieving and sedating. So it can be used for all of those properties together or separately. But if you were using it as a bitter, you would only need a very small dose of it, because actually tasting the bitterness is a big part of what is setting off that reaction. So taking a few drops of it under the tongue might work just as well for that part of its action as taking a teaspoonful of it. Some herbs like aloe, particularly some varieties of aloe, are intensely bitter and also stimulating to the rest of the digestive system. We would sometimes call those stimulant laxatives, but sometimes people would also call them cholagogue laxatives. Cholagogue, mean the chola part means the CHOLA means the bile, and gog means that it produces it or causes it to be produced. So cholagogue laxatives tend to produce like green watery bowel movements, and there are a number of them. They're actually pretty popular in the traditional medicine of Eastern Kentucky. So there are things like the golden seal, which I mentioned, which is right here. You see the color of that. It's kind of well, it looks dark when I hold it right in front of it, but it's got like a very yellow color to it. And then show you another one. This one is a very faint yellow color. This is mayapple, Podophyllum peltatum, and this is also known as American mandrake. And if you were there this weekend, you got to see some of it growing. It's a very distinctive umbrella-shaped leaf that grows out in the woods. And so that is a cholagogue. It's also poisonous. If you get a little too much of it, it will make you vomit intensely. If you get more than that, it can be dangerous. So it's not a good do-it-yourself herb, not a good beginner level herb, but it is something that is very much used in the folk medicine of Eastern Kentucky. And so that's another example of, it's got bitterness and it's got some yellowish color to it. Licorice is another one that is not as bitter. It does have some bitterness to it. It also has a yellowish color to it. Oh, let me get over here. Also has a yellowish color to it. It's in a jar that says mullein for reasons I do not understand. I didn't put it there, but that's licorice root extract, and it's a sweet and bitter herb that has some effects on the liver as well as the kidneys. So it's not purely a liver herb, but it is a digestive system herb pretty strongly, among other things. So there is a traditional association between bitterness and yellowness and the liver, and part of that is just because some yellow alkaloids are bitter, and part of it has to do with kind of the association of yellowness with liver dysfunction in the body. So if somebody's liver is inflamed, sometimes you will see like yellow coloring in the whites of their eyes. Sometimes the skin color will change and get more yellowish as well. So that can happen with hepatitis. It can happen with jaundice in babies. It can happen with liver failure in people. That happens for a whole variety of different reasons. But there is kind of this association association with yellow and the color yellow and the liver. And so a lot of the time people have used yellow herbs for the liver, and it doesn't work with all of them. I mean, there are lots of yellow herbs that don't really have that much to do with the liver, like sunflowers and calendula, for instance. But there are a number of bitter yellow herbs, and so that's traditionally been something that people have kind of mentally associated with each other. So when somebody's liver is not functioning, you can get that yellowish color. You also get distension of the abdomen, which is where the abdomen is like big and round and swollen. And sometimes if you press on it, you can hear water sloshing around inside in between the spaces in between the organs. And then also at another stage of things, you can feel like a hard, like normally if you feel someone's side, it's pretty hard to feel where their liver is because it's got a similar squishy texture to the muscles over it. But if somebody has very bad, very advanced damage to their liver, it can actually feel like a hard rock-like substance underneath the muscles. So all of those things would be signs of liver dysfunction. There are also other signs that are not as obvious, like digestive issues. Sometimes the liver being badly misfunctional can result in mental changes too, mood changes, including anger and forgetfulness. Anger and forgetfulness happen for a whole lot of reasons. So, just the fact that they're there isn't a way that you can really assess someone's liver as being bad. But if you see someone whose liver is having trouble with those issues, sometimes that's why. Sometimes there really is a connection between those things. So there are other liver herbs that are not bitter, and I think that that's an important thing to be aware of too. St. John's wort, for instance, speeds up the rate at which the liver metabolizes stuff, and it is not really bitter tasting. Sassafras has a lot of different uses. It moves the lymph and it's mood elevating, but it is also traditionally considered a liver herb, something that helps the liver to metabolize and purify the blood, so to speak, meaning that it just kind of breaks down substances and waste products that aren't supposed to be there. Red clover also has that use, and those are all sweet herbs that are not bitter at all. So I talk a lot about bitter herbs in the liver and the connection between them, but it's important to realize that not all herbs that have an affinity for or an effect on the liver are going to be bitter. And of course, the ones that I mentioned as hepatoprotectives, those ones are not. The milk thistle is not bitter. Rosemary can be bitter, but it's more aromatic than anything else. It's usually not really meaningfully bitter. All right, hang on just a minute. I will be right back. All right. So one of the herbs that I want to talk about in some depth today is burdock. Now, if you were with us at Heisel Farm during the first herb walk a couple of months ago, almost 3 months ago now, we saw burdock then growing near the barn. Burdock has leaves that can get very, very large, maybe like 3 feet long or so. And it is an herbaceous plant. It's not really woody or anything. I mean, the leftover stems are kind of a little bit woody, but it's a green plant, not a shrub. And it puts down a large taproot. The taproot is sometimes that big around and can go a few feet into the ground sometimes if it's growing in loose soil. So burdock is traditionally eaten as a vegetable, and it's also used as a medicine. And I like it in both roles pretty well. So the way it grows is it grows from seed, and the fruit is actually what people were inspired by when they created Velcro, the closure Velcro. So the fruit is a little ball with lots of tiny hooks on it, and those hooks are designed to attach themselves to something woolly or felty, like a sheep's fur or a dog's hair or a person's clothes, and hook into it and get dragged somewhere and then picked out and fall on the ground, and then they break apart into small seeds. And those burrs are why it's called burdock, and they'll grow into new plants. The first year that they grow, sometimes the first few years that they grow, it's just leaves. And the leaves get really big. They often grow in kind of shady places, like along fences, up against buildings, right along the edges of fields, right under the trees, at the edge of woods. So they often grow in places that are partly shady. And they'll start growing like a lot of plants that grow in that type of situation. They'll start growing before the trees have leafed out. They'll start growing really anytime that it's not totally frozen outside, they'll start growing. And they'll continue to grow and grow and grow. And an individual leaf will continue to grow and grow and grow for months and soak up as much sunlight as it can, and then it dies back. And after it's done that a bunch of times, well, twice, sometimes 4 times, then it will send up a flowering stalk, and it has little purple flowers, and then this fruit that looks like a ball of little hooks that attaches itself to things. The leaves are, you can eat the leaves when they're very new, or if you cook them and change out the water some, but the texture of them is not excellent. They're a little bit furry, so I don't really like to eat them. I saw on Instagram a video where someone had made a hat out of one of them, and they'd just like taken a piece of the stem and used it to make a closure in the back, and they were wearing the leaf as like a big Robin Hood hat. And it looked very fairy-ish. It was a very interesting look. So that's a possible use for the leaf. Some of them are big enough you could probably use it as an umbrella. But I don't really use the leaves for anything. The root is, like I said, food and medicine. If you get a full-size burdock root, it can be a really big root. And it's really tough when it's raw, and it's also pretty bitter when it's raw. But if you cut it up and you cook it and you drain the water off of it, then you get a lot of the bitterness out of it. But that bitter stuff is the medicine, is a big part of the medicine. So the bitters in it, the saponins in it, the terpenes in it, aromatic bitter type substances that are in it can be taken as a tonic for the liver and the digestive system. And that's the main use that it gets put towards in terms of it being medicinal. If you just want to make a tincture of it, you can slice the roots up while it's fresh, then let it dry, and then make a tincture of it. And it will actually have a really dark color to it and a strong, earthy, bitter, aromatic taste, slightly warming, slightly sweet, and mostly bitter. And I use burdock for a lot of people just as like a mild herb to stimulate the liver. It's not super intense the way that aloe latex or golden seal or gentian, which is another very bitter herb, would be. It's super mild, but very noticeable. In the 1800s, dandelion and burdock together, dandelion leaf and burdock root together, were a popular beverage as an alternative to beer. This is a time when in England and in the United States, a lot of people drank beer extensively, sometimes almost to the exclusion of water. And then there was the temperance movement, which kind of came along and said, hey, it's probably not good for people to drink that much. And so a lot of people switched to this dandelion and burdock beverage, which some versions of are still made commercially. It still does exist as a beverage, but it was pretty popular in the 1800s for a while. Kind of like root beer, same tradition and same time period that root beer became popular. For whatever reason, root beer has become more of a well-known beverage, even though most modern root beer probably doesn't have any actual roots in it, whereas dandelion and burdock is not so well remembered anymore. But both came around at about the same time, and or at least became popular for a while at around the same time. Oh, hang on a second. Just a moment. All right, so. All right. So yeah, burdock is probably one of my first line liver herbs, one of the things that I would be most likely to use if somebody came to me and was having just sort of a situation where they needed some help with their liver. It's not something I would use in a situation where there was a lot of liver inflammation, because it is a little bit stimulating to the liver. But if things were seeming sluggish with their digestion or something like that, it might be something that I would use. The other herb that I want to talk about is horehound. Horehound is a member of the mint family. It's covered in white hairs, which is where it gets the name horehound. The hore part means white, and the hound part means dog. I don't know why it's called hound, but it has white hairs on it, and it has a deeply furrowed, veined surface. It looks pretty distinctive. It makes it pretty easy to recognize. Burdock has a slightly bitter and very vegetable-y kind of flavor, and it can be used as a digestive bitter. In large enough doses, it can also be used to induce vomiting, although there are a lot of other things that are more efficient at that. But its main use that it's known for is for supporting the lungs. So it is a bitter, it's a bit of a liver herb, and it's also a lung herb, a respiratory herb. So probably the thing that it's most known for right now is that it's used in a lot of cough remedies. The American Herbal Products Association did a survey a while back, a few years ago, where they were looking at which herbs were the top selling herbs in the country. And in terms of the actual number of doses of medicine that people were purchasing, horehound was actually number one by a pretty wide margin, because there are a few successful commercial products that are for cough drops that are made using horehound. So it's a pretty widely used herbal remedy in terms of finished products that people buy and don't even necessarily know that that's what's in them. It's not something that other herbalists use in clinical practice all that often around here. I don't know about, it's not native to North America. It's native to Europe, and has been part of the herbal tradition over there for a very long time, probably forever. And so it might be more widely used over there, I'm not sure. In the traditional medicine in Eastern Kentucky, it's pretty widely used. It's pretty well known. Horehound candy or horehound cough drops are a pretty standard home remedy. They're actually, hard candy is actually one of the harder types of medicine to make, because you have to boil it hot enough that it will actually, because it's liquid and it just looks liquid like boiling syrup. But if you don't get it hot enough, when it cools, it won't be hard candy texture. It'll be more of a caramely type of texture. So making hard candy is actually pretty difficult, but horehound is something that people do make into a hard candy, which people eat both just for the pleasant taste of it, which a lot of people find disgusting. It's one of these things like, I guess, like black jelly beans or like pineapple on pizza that some people really like and some people really hate. But a lot of people have a strong opinion. A lot of people in this part of the country have a strong opinion on horehound candy. I personally like it, but it is bitter and it is very vegetative tasting. It tastes like a vegetable, a sugary vegetable when it's in candy form. So that's its effect is very mildly expectorant, helps to break up phlegm, and it's more of a cough suppressant. So it's not as strong of a cough suppressant as cherry bark, but it actually does sort of just decrease how easy it is for the person to cough. So a lot of the time, if somebody has really irritated lung tissue, if they take anything deeper than a shallow breath, they start coughing. So horehound actually kind of allows you to take a deeper breath without coughing. And so that's helpful. like I said, in large doses, it can induce vomiting. And if somebody is having a hard time breathing, sometimes inducing vomiting with horehound, or I usually would use lobelia for the same application. Sometimes that will actually make their breathing get better afterwards. Now, you have to be careful with that because you don't want somebody to choke on their vomit or something like that. But so generally speaking, inducing vomiting is like a much harsher approach than what I would usually take. But like I said before, folk medicine in Eastern Kentucky often likes dramatic approaches. So it's something that I definitely saw people use and heard about people use when I was living in that community and learning about that type of healing. So horehound is easy to grow. It's not as likely to take over your garden as some other mints are. Although if it gets a spot that it really likes, sometimes it will do that. But a lot of the time it doesn't become as invasive and as prolific as other mints do, partly because it is less likely to spread along the ground, to spread vegetatively. It's more, mostly it grows from seeds, whereas a lot of mints, they'll grow from seeds. They'll start from seeds, but then they'll grow from the roots and send up runners and come up in other places all on the same plant. And horehound doesn't do that very much. So it's not as likely to take over your garden or anything. So it's a pretty easy herbal medicine to grow. It's one that you don't tend to use a whole lot of, but it can be helpful to have around. So it's something that's easy to grow all of that you need. So I grow all the horehound that I need for my practice for the whole year in a very large flower pot. I mean, it's probably like 2 feet across or something like that. A big planter full of the stuff, which I harvest in late spring, and then that's it for the year. And make a couple gallons of tincture out of it, and then that's about all I need. Like I said, it's very widely used commercially, but not something I use a whole lot in the clinic. Most of its applications, I have other things that I usually use for that, but it is a versatile herb in terms of being a liver promoting herb and therefore helping with digestion as a bitter, being a mild laxative, being able to induce vomiting if you need to with it, and being a cough suppressant. So it's got a lot of different things that it can do. It's pretty hard to cause any real harm with it, and it's easy to grow. So it has been one of the more common garden herbs to be used in traditional Kentucky medicine. Most of the herbs that are widely used here are ones that grow wild. There's a few of them like aloe and comfrey that are generally cultivated, and horehound is another one of those. So it's a good one to know about, and a good one to work with early on in your practice, because it's less intense than some of the other herbs that would fill similar niches. Like, for instance, it's much safer than cherry bark as a cough suppressant. I think cherry bark as a cough suppressant is a little too strong, and you don't want to create a situation where you're suppressing the cough but not treating the situation underlying it. Whereas horehound just makes it easier to breathe without having to cough so much. A lot of the time, if I were going to make something out of horehound or give somebody some horehound, I would combine it with another mint called, well, there are actually a few other mints that I might use along with it. One of them, which we saw over the weekend, is mountain mint or pycnanthemum, which has an oregano type of flavor and grows wild in places in the woods where the canopy is open, which often means places where some trees have fallen or been cut or something like that. Does Horehound doesn't grow wild here, no. Perhaps occasionally as an escapee from cultivation, but it doesn't tend to be real persistent. It tends to last for a year or two if it's neglected and then sort of die off, unlike a lot of other mints that will grow in the same place year after year. But the pycnanthemum, the mountain mint, does grow wild here. Thyme is another one that I often combine it with. Thyme is one of my favorite respiratory support herbs and also a member of the mint family, like horehound and mountain mint. All right. So yeah, horehound and burdock are both more herbs that I would tend to harvest in springtime. But with burdock in particular, you can find it pretty much all year around here anyway you can. And right now it's easy to recognize because the leaves are very large at this point and because a lot of it is in bloom now. So if you get out into nature and you want to look for burdock, I would say look for it alongside old buildings like barns and things like that that nobody's mowing or spraying near, and also along fence rows and edges of woods. That's often where you'll find it growing. And it's if you choose to harvest it, a lot of the time the easiest place to harvest it from is somewhere that dirt has been piled up. For instance, if a field has been cleared and people have made a pile of dirt and rocks that they've pushed out of the field, a lot of the time that will be very loose soil. And so it's much easier to extract a couple foot long root out of that than it is out of just hard soil and mixed with tree roots and things like that. But it's definitely not something you should expect to pull up by the roots. It's something you should expect to dig out around and dig it out. At least the first one that you dig out, you often would have to make a big hole. And then, once the hole is made, that might allow you to access some of the other roots around it. When I lived in Central Asia, the Kazakh people that lived there, they didn't eat a whole lot of vegetables. Their diet was mostly meat and dairy products because they're traditionally herders. But burdock was something that I would almost always see if I went to the market. Sometimes burdock and potato were the only vegetables that they would have if you went to the market and tried to find vegetables. There wouldn't be anything like lettuce. Sometimes there would be carrots, nothing green, except the burdock was sometimes kind of green, but nothing like leafy or broccoli or anything like that. Just mostly root vegetables, and burdock was one of the few root vegetables that was common to see in the market there. And they used it medicinally as well as using it as a food. All right. Well, all right. So, right now it is August. And if you get a chance to go out into the fields and things, there might still be a few blackberries and wild cherries finishing up their growing. Sometime over the next week to a few weeks, pawpaws are going to be getting ripe. So if you know where any of those are, this is the time of year when they actually start getting ripe. A lot of people think of them as being more of a September and October thing, but it depends on the tree. And some of them get ripe in August, some of them get ripe in September, some of them as late as October. So if you're unfamiliar with pawpaws, they're quite delightful. They're like I don't know. I don't even know how to describe them. They're very soft and sweet, and they're probably the largest native fruit that you can find around here. Another thing that is going on right now is that ragweed is blooming, and there are two kinds of ragweed here: regular old ragweed and giant ragweed. And the regular common ragweed starts blooming first, and right now they're both blooming. And so these are plants that have very inconspicuous looking flowers that produce a lot of pollen. They don't have very noticeable flowers because they're not trying to attract insects as pollinators. They have a different strategy, which is that they produce lots and lots of fine dust-like pollen that gets carried by the wind and covers everything, including somewhere out there the female flowers of the same species, which it then fertilizes if that's what it happens to land on. Most of it doesn't land on that. Most of it lands on everything else: trees, cars, the road, people's nostrils. Just kind of goes everywhere. So it's a different strategy. So that some plants with showy flowers produce larger sticky pollen that sticks to insects, gets carried by those insects to another showy looking attractive flower and fertilizes it. And then some plants, especially trees, but also ragweed, artemisias, which are also blooming right now, and some other plants produce just absolute clouds of fine dust-like pollen. And so that's what people call hay fever, is when people are having a reaction to that pollen. It's not caused by hay. It just happens to happen at the same time as the hay cutting. Now, when you're cutting hay and working with hay, you do breathe in a lot of dust, and that can cause asthma attacks as well. But this is a separate thing that has been saddled with the name hay fever. Also, a lot of people think that goldenrods are what cause it, because if you look out over the fields, not so much just yet, but over the next couple of weeks, you'll see more and more. There are a few right now of goldenrods blooming, and goldenrods are just a bright yellow flower. The flower itself is not that big or anything, but it's a little spike of bright yellow flowers, and you can see just lots and lots of them growing in pastures. And because they bloom at the same time that people start having pollen allergies, people see those flowers and think, oh, that's the flower that's causing the pollen allergies. To the extent that a lot of people don't realize that ragweed and goldenrod are not the same thing. And people joke about goldenrod. Goldenrod's Kentucky's state flower. People joke about ragweed being our state flower because lots of people here have allergies to it. It's probably just because we have lots of pasture land here, and that's where it grows. But you know, so if you're seeing people coming to you with a lot of allergies right now, you know, be aware that that's actually probably what it's to, are the ragweed and perhaps the artemisias, which are also blooming right now, but especially the ragweed, which is just a lot more prolific in this part of the country. There's just a lot more of it. The main things that people can do for that, other than staying out of the areas where it is, or, you know, wearing a mask if they're going to be outside where there's a lot of pollen, is to Well, you can take antihistamine herbs, herbs that have an antihistamine property. Chamomile is a real easy one to come by that most people are familiar with. It will often help with allergies. Nettle leaf is another good one. Anything decongestant that's like minty or aromatic will often help to, if there's a lot of congestion, it will help it to drain. And so those are some things that you might be seeing right now. Kind of an entire different topic for a different class, but that's something just that I want to kind of have everybody be aware of because of what's going on in the natural world right now, is that there is a lot of that happening. A lot of people presenting with allergies and a lot of plants producing massive quantities of pollen. So, and if you are working with any cases like that and you need any help, feel free to reach out to me, preferably by text, but other forms of contact work as well. Might take me longer to get around to. Let's see. Hopefully everybody's still working on your plant collections and getting a decent number of specimens. There's still a lot of things blooming right now. And there will be through August, but it will start to decline after that. Also, if I know I keep mentioning this, but if anybody wants to come over on the 19th, I'll be making some wild harvested food. And if you're doing any gathering yourself right now, black walnuts are starting to fall from the trees, and that is a very gatherable thing at this moment. Black walnuts are used for skin conditions and for intestinal parasites, and you can very easily get enough in a few minutes to last you all year long, because each black walnut hull is about that big, a little bit smaller than a tennis ball, and similar color and shape. And so you don't really need that many of them to make a half a gallon of tincture, which is probably all you're going to need for a while. So, I very much encourage all of you to go out and try and gather things for yourselves and have that kind of a hands-on experience with the plants that are available right now. Another one that's available right now, not to be missed, is elderberry. Elderberries are ripe right now. If you wait very much longer, the birds will eat them all. But in this area, of course, it's different depending on where you live. But here in central Kentucky, elderberries are ripe right now, and it's a great chance to go out and find them. Processing them is a pain. It's very labor intensive, but they're a really useful herb to have around, and have been an enormous help during the course of this last few years of more than usual viral illnesses. All right. Any questions about the liver or about the herbs that we've talked about today? All right. Well, I will talk to you again in another week, and we'll be talking about another organ and the functions that go with it, and some herbs and strategies for supporting. All right. Thanks, everybody, and hope you have a good night. Thank you.